Hello and welcome to Friday Night Arcade. This week we're taking a look at something I had no idea even existed when I was a kid. This is an actual genuine set of wireless controllers for the Atari 2600 video computer system. Who needs Bluetooth when you got these bad boys, huh? So it turns out there were a couple of different manufacturers that made these types of controllers, but this particular set was actually manufactured by Atari. As best as I can tell, they all operated off of a similar premise though. You had a receiver that would plug directly into the Atari console, and then you had two controllers that you could use. These operated using an RF signal, and it turns out this was actually a bit of a problem for Atari. When they first started developing prototypes for these, the RF signal was so strong it could have potentially set off garage door openers 1,000 feet away, or you'd be inadvertently controlling your neighbor's pitfall game from across the street. This meant that there was no way they could have gotten it approved by the FCC. This was actually going to be part of a prototype system that they were calling the Atari 2700 that would have actually been basically a premium version of the Atari 2600. It was going to have touchscreen controls and all of this crazy stuff, including wireless controllers, but they just couldn't get it approved by the FCC, and this was probably right around the time of the video game crash anyway, so they kind of scrapped the whole idea. But the wireless controllers did actually eventually make their way onto the market. Looking closer at the packaging, the box promises instantaneous response, and we'll just have to see about that. When Atari first released these controllers, they carried a suggested retail price of $69.95, which comes out to about $180 after inflation. I guess only the little rich kids could get on the wireless Atari fun. I'm anxious to see what the lag time is on these and just how tactile they really are. The Electronic Bay listing I bought this off of said they had never been used before. The buttons do feel nice and clicky, although it looks like some little kid used this joystick as a chew toy. Thankfully, they didn't leave any batteries in them that would have leaked over the years and gotten battery acid all over the insides. Each controller runs off a 9-volt battery. The box also says you can play up to 20 feet away and promises to clean up all those messy wires. Overall though, these look pretty cool. And I gotta say, I like the look of the receiver too. It's got the old-fashioned pull-out antenna on it. It's just got kind of a nice, clean 70s technology feel to it. And I'm anxious to hook this thing up and see how it works. So without further ado, let's head upstairs, hook this thing up, and see if it works. Okay, so for the purposes of this test, I'm not gonna use any modded consoles or fancy upscalers or anything like that. I want to get a raw test of how much latency and responsiveness this has. So instead, we're just going to use my OG Atari 2600 console. This is the one that has been in my family for probably about 40 years. I think my parents had it before I was born, and it's the one that I played on, so that's pretty cool. It somehow still works, even though my PS3 just died a couple weeks ago. One thing that I wanted to show you, the way that this works is, this is actually the receiver. So this lives kind of in the general vicinity of your Atari 2600 console. And it plugs in, there's a couple different ways that this plugs in. You've got your standard controller 1 and controller 2, which is basically just your basic 9-port controller adapter that you would normally see on your Atari controller. Plugs into controller 1 and controller 2, respectively. And then the other thing that I wanted to show you was how this thing gets power. So this is the receiver. There's an antenna that pulls out on the back, and then the way that this gets power is very interesting to me. So I thought that this would just have a normal AC adapter since it's a separate device, but actually all it has is this little thing. So if you can get a closer look at that. Basically the way that this works, and this is actually in the instruction manual, you will take the AC adapter from the Atari 2600 and unplug it. So that's this cord right here. You will unplug that and plug it into the back of the receiver for the wireless controllers. So, and then what you'll do is you'll take this and plug it into the back of the Atari 2600. So that means that the power is coming from your wall outlet, going into the Atari 2600 wireless controller receiver, powering the receiver, and then traveling from that all the way to the console and powering the console. I'm not 100% sure if this is going to work, so I will have a fire extinguisher on hand, and hopefully we won't be setting my grandparents' Atari 2600 on fire today. Let's see if this works. Okay, well, we got everything hooked up, so here goes nothing. Let's fire this up and see if she runs. And I'll be darned, it's actually working. So, okay, so that means that power is going through the radio receiver for the controllers and actually getting to the console. So it appears that everything is actually working. So let's try out the controllers and see what happens. Okay, so we're just firing this up for the first time here, and one thing I did notice was the controller was kind of wiggling a little bit when I first plugged it in. So what I actually did was I read somewhere that you can get a little bit of interference from a Wi-Fi signal or something like that. So I unplugged my wireless router because it actually lives right behind the Atari. So I thought maybe that might be messing with it a little bit. But basically, it does work. It's definitely not perfect. And I don't know if that's because the signal is bad or if that's just because maybe this controller, the controller's 38 years old. So, I mean, it's working. I mean, I'm playing Space Invaders, but this game probably doesn't require as much hairpin trigger response as, say, Chopper Command or River Raid or something like that. So I'm making this look easy, but really I'm having to try as hard as I can here. I feel like right when you first turn the controller on, there's a little bit of a sluggishness to it, almost like it takes it a minute just to kind of get synced up with. See, and there you can see sometimes it's like it doesn't quite pick up. It doesn't quite pick up the response from the controller, and I can't say that it doesn't work, but let's try it with a different game and see what happens. So now we're gonna try Cosmic Arc. Cosmic Arc requires a lot of very rapid movements, especially with the joystick, as well as just very precise response time. So this will be a good test as to whether or not this is actually working or not. Yeah, see, that time it didn't even register the input that I pushed down. See, that was close. Yeah, see, it's having a real hard time picking up down. And it could just be that the controller is broken. I mean, that's possible too. What I might do is swap out the controllers. Oh, see, I'm not going to make it. Yeah, it has a real problem with up and down. So what I might do is swap out the inputs on the receiver and just see if the other controller works a little better. Oh, it did it again. So this is with the other controller and it's still not. Yeah, see, it's having a real hard time with up and down movements. So left and right works okay. And the button seems to work okay, but up and down definitely does not work. Okay, so yeah, River Raid doesn't require a whole lot of up and down on the joystick, but you do need it to slow down, and like I can't even slow down at all. So yeah, it doesn't really seem like it's going to work for this either. Yeah, the button's working okay. The fire button works just fine. And left and right work pretty okay, but up and down definitely does not work. That's really not functional. So, unless you're just trying to do a no brakes challenge on River Raid, I don't really think this is going to work for you. Well, we gave it the old college try. Unfortunately, it just didn't work. I think we proved the concept that it probably could work, but either the controller just maybe is broken internally, maybe it needs some restoration. Like I said, the listing said it had never been used, but I doubt that considering the bite marks that I was seeing on, on the joystick and everything. So, It's hard to say why it wasn't working. I tried a different set of batteries. I tried various distances from the receiver. I tried getting right up next to the receiver. I tried standing 5 or 10 feet away from the receiver. And I just couldn't get a consistent signal that would even remotely consider this to be playable or usable in a realistic scenario. Also, from a practicality standpoint, I'm not really sure that it's something I would want to necessarily use anyway. Even though the cord on the original Atari 2600 controller was very short, odds are most Atari games only lasted 5 or 10 minutes before you had to hit the reset button again anyway, so you probably would want to be pretty close to the console. In fact, the console actually made up for this by having an extra long AC adapter, so you could actually have the console pretty close to you, and then it didn't matter that the cord was only 1.5 or 2 feet long anyway. And then there's certain games that actually require you to use buttons on the console for in-game functionality. Star Master, Space Shuttle, games like that. Star Master, you had to use the black and white toggle switch to toggle into the navigational computer, so you'd want to be next to the console for that anyway. And then also there's just the simple fact that one controller is way bigger than the other. This is the original controller. In fact, this is the one that I actually had when I was a kid, which still works. And then this one is it's kind of like the double quarter pounder with cheese version of the Atari 2600 controller. And then you've got this big silly antenna sticking out of it too, which it wasn't that big of a deal, but it's definitely not like the Bluetooth controllers that you have now for PlayStation 3 and 4 and all that stuff. So yeah, at least from my perspective, I could not get these to work, and I definitely couldn't recommend picking these up. Like I said before, it could have been some sort of internal component of the controller, maybe busted. It could also just be that there's sources of interference that are present now in 2019 that just simply weren't here in the early 80s. Wi-Fi signals. I disabled the Wi-Fi signal in the house, but I mean, every one of my neighbors probably has a wireless router, so it could be that. It could be cell phone towers. Could be the garage door downstairs is causing some sort of interference. Who knows? So if anybody knows more about these, I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear your experience if you had these growing up, or maybe if you've gotten these to work more recently. Either the Atari brand that I was using here or one of the other manufacturers that produce these. And that's all for this week, so thank you very much for watching. Please don't text and drive, and I'll see you next time on Friday Night Arcade.